What if there was a reason that could be simply explained for why it's so hard to be motivated? That with a few simple strategies, you can start finding motivation anytime you want it. Too good to be true. Only one way to find out. Today we're going to be talking about the brain.
On some others.
Don't worry, you don't need a neuroscience degree, and I sure as heck don't have one. Over the last decade, I've observed a lot about my own patterns and things that motivate and don't motivate me, and eventually learned a few things that have been very helpful, which is why I've been able to keep this YouTube channel going for 15 weeks now, a diet and exercise routine for the last 4 months. Today, you're gonna find out the secret. Obviously, a few things are gonna be oversimplified, but for application purposes, they will be awesome. So let's talk about
Brain.
You've probably heard about your prefrontal cortex. That's your smart person brain. There's a good chance you've also heard of your amygdala, which is what freaks out when something seems like a threat. So here's the cool thing. Let's say you are anticipating something. Your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex start gossiping. Your amygdala is like, hey, there's a threat. And your prefrontal cortex is like, oh, let's justify the threat. Let's think of all the ways this is threatening. And they can gossip back and forth for longer and longer. If you let them keep going, eventually cortisol joins the party and my man is gonna flood your system with stress hormones. What does that look like? That looks like if you were to have an app on your phone that's running with so many resources that you can't use any of the other apps. It's very possible when you're stressed that you can't even access your thinking brain, and that sucks. How do we avoid getting into this downward spiral? You've probably noticed the more times you've gone through that spiral on an activity, the more negative associations you have with that activity and the harder it is to ever get started. So let's start fixing course on that. Mindfulness. You've heard a lot about it. Let's make it practical. Yes! Just knowing that your brain is going to go through this process of gossiping about all the possible threats is going to be useful because it's no longer going to be unexpected and unknown and all that, which are all terrifying things to your brain.
Knowledge.
Next, you can use mindfulness and breathing and relaxation techniques because there's another part of your brain called the insula, which is what causes like the rapid heart rate and your body to tingle when you're anxious and all those things. And instead of it sending communication to you, you can calm down, relax, breathe slower, let your body kind of soften, and you're sending signals back to it that like, hey, the body's not freaking out. This person's probably fine. So that's an aspect of mindfulness, calming down that gossip cycle so you don't trigger all these other fight or flight responses. Once you're in a calm state, the way to avoid getting into that state in the first place is through immediate action. And you might be thinking, oh,
Just do it!
cliche advice, but maybe it'll help to know why and how it actually functions. In the first instance with the gossiping, if you do something, you might not be surprised, but a different circuit of your brain altogether starts to fire. This is your sensory cortex, which deals with like live sense information. So like your sights, your smells, and all these things. And the wonderful thing about that is while the prefrontal cortex can come up with infinite scenarios, your sense information is dealing with what's going on right now.
Nice.
So a silly way that this showed up for me in the last couple days, I meant to do my dishes for a while. Every time I walked by the kitchen, I felt like the tension and all the reasons and excuses for why I shouldn't do it and why I can put it off and why it's not important. Until eventually, one of the times I walked into the kitchen, I just grabbed the spatula and I started cleaning it. And immediately I was in it, and then I did the rest of the dishes and everything was fine. Now it's much easier for dishes than anything else, but other things are gonna work the same way. If you can swallow the bitter pill and jump into it, you're just going to interrupt that downward spiral and just make a different part of your brain work altogether. So with mindfulness, you can calm yourself down and be aware of the process, which helps a lot. Finding a way to take the action right away is gonna help escape this cycle altogether. A couple bonus tips. One is if you have to do something and you're dreading it, seeing it as a challenge or a puzzle also activates a different part of your brain. It will inspire you for creative thinking and cognitively working your way through said puzzle. So what's the most efficient way I can do this? What's the most innovative way I can do this? Those can all be ways to snap your brain out of like, oh, this is like an obligation and I have to do it. Another tip is that when you're feeling angry while doing something, or if you're feeling angry because you're avoiding doing something, that's also typically obstacle based, where it's like, oh, I want to do X, I want to have fun, I want to get to work on time, I want to do whatever. And then something interrupts you.
That will make you angry.
And in anger, anything that's like overly emotional is things that will often suppress your cognitive ability. So that's why you'll make mistakes and do stupid things when you're angry. When the emotional brain is running rampant, it's just you're not going to do things as well. Any sense of writing things down, like acknowledging an emotion while you have your like limbic system, which is your emotional brain. If you're thinking about an emotion, that's still in your prefrontal cortex. So that's another way to switch things into what you can most control, which is like your thinking, your thoughts, etc. And that's when acknowledging an emotion or writing down an emotion isn't just a woo-woo thing, but passing the ball from your emotional brain to your thinking brain is often going to be very useful in terms of what you have conscious control over to get motivated. And lastly, acknowledge that if you do have a lot of cycles of hating to do the dishes hundreds of times, the first time you grab a spatula, clean it, and then get through the rest of your dishes doesn't guarantee that every time from now on you're going to be excited about it. But every time you take action right away and you see yourself succeeding at a goal that like mattered to you, you're going to get dopamine and your brain's just going to start forming, oh, doing the dishes is rewarding. I don't have to avoid it. It's not going to take 100 times, but it's not going to take 1 or 2. It might take a few. But thankfully, if you master starting right away, you're going to avoid all of that initial spiral anyways. So to get motivated, you put that gossip train to a rest, you calm yourself down, you take the first action, and you do that enough for your brain to no longer associate the thing you're trying to get motivated to do with negativity, and then you can be motivated all the time. Till next time, I'm Alex, and this was me being motivated to talk about motivation.